At 14:20 on April 12, 1943, Guards Captain Alexander Ivanovich Pokrushkin was bait. Thousands of feet above the Kuban River's swampy delta, he gripped the stick of his American-made P-39 Cobra, the cockpit filled with the acrid tang of hydraulic fluid, unburnt aviation fuel, and his own cold sweat. The American fighter was an orphan, rejected by its own makers, and the airframe vibrated violently around him. The source of the vibration was the 37mm cannon mounted in the nose, its barrel protruding through the propeller hub, effectively strapped between his legs. He wasn't looking up. He was looking down. Below him, the green-brown mud of the Taman Peninsula was a sprawling hell. This was the Gotenkopf, the Goth's Head, position, the last major German bridgehead in the Caucasus. It was a fortress of interlocking fire, defended by the 17th Army. Through the haze, Pokrushkin could see the dark, beetle-like shapes of Panzer IVs and the long snouts of 88mm guns dug into the earth. They were systematically annihilating the Soviet ground troops trying to dislodge them. But the Panzers weren't the immediate threat. The sky was. Attention! Achtung! Achtung! Messers! Hi, from the sun! The radio, a crackling, static-filled box of doom, confirmed what Pokrushkin already knew. A swarm of Messerschmitt Bf-109s, the yellow-nosed demons of Jägerschwader 52, JG-52, was peeling off from 18,000 feet, beginning their high-speed dive. They were the aces of the Kuban, the deadliest pilots the Luftwaffe had. Hold formation! Hold formation, the regimental commissar's voice screamed over the radio. Do not break the pattern. Pokrushkin clenched his teeth so hard his jaw ached. Hold formation. That order was a death sentence. His squadron, the 16th Guards Fighter Aviation Regiment, was flying the standard, suicidal Soviet VVS tactic, the Zveno, a rigid V of 3 aircraft. It was a parade formation, a relic of 1930s doctrine. It was inflexible, it left the pilots blind to their rear, and it forced the wingmen to be little more than glorified bodyguards, forbidden to break off and engage. The Germans had a name for it. They called it the Kuban Carousel. It was a turkey shoot. The Germans attacked in pairs, the Rot. They were a fluid, lethal system. They would dive from the sun, unseen, fire a single, accurate burst, and use their retained energy to climb back into the sky, untouchable. Pokrushkin watched, helpless, as the first pair of 109 selected their target, the new pilots, the greenies, flying on the far left. The tracers lit up the sky. He saw the flash as 20mm cannon shells tore through the wing of a fellow P-39. The plane didn't explode, it simply came apart, as if undone by an invisible hand. The engine, freed from its mounts, tumbled end over end, trailing black smoke. This was the problem. This was the failure. And the aircraft he was flying was supposed to be the answer, but it was just another part of the problem. The P-39 Airacobra was, by every Western metric, a piece of junk. It was born from a radical 1937 Bell aircraft design. The concept was revolutionary: build a fighter around the biggest gun possible. The answer was the 37mm M4 cannon. But to fit the massive weapon, the engine, an Allison V-1710 V-12, had to be placed behind the pilot, in the middle of the fuselage. This gave the P-39 its bizarre, unconventional profile, with a long drive shaft running under the cockpit floor. It was the first fighter in history with tricycle landing gear, and pilots entered through a car door on the side, a feature they despised, as it was prone to jamming, turning the cockpit into a coffin during an emergency. But its cardinal sin, the one that got it exiled, was its breath. It couldn't breathe at high altitude. The original American design called for a turbosupercharger. But the U.S. Army Air Forces, in a moment of catastrophic bureaucratic short-sightedness, decreed that the turbosupercharger was to be reserved for heavy bombers. The P-39 was fitted with a simple, single-stage supercharger that choked the Allison engine of air above 15,000 feet. When the Royal Air Force received their first batch, they were appalled. The Caribou, as they briefly named it, was useless for the high-altitude combat of the European theater. it couldn't touch a Bf-109 above 20,000 feet. It was a dog. The RAF rejected it. The USAF, embarrassed, dumped it in the Pacific, where pilots found it was a death trap against the nimble Japanese Zeros. The P-39 was a failed interceptor. It was an orphan. And so, under the terms of the Lend-Lease Act, thousands of these unwanted, unloved, junk fighters were crated up and shipped to the one ally desperate enough to take them, the Soviet Union. To the VVS, fighting a low-altitude, brutal war of attrition, the junk fighter was a godsend. They didn't care about 20,000 feet. The war on the Eastern Front was fought at 10,000 feet and below, in the mud and the smoke, directly over the heads of the infantry. And at that altitude, the P-39 was fast, it was maneuverable, and it had the gun. But the gun, that 37mm cannon, was also a lie. It was a low-velocity weapon. Its shells, the size of milk bottles, had a looping, rainbow-like trajectory. It was designed to shoot down bombers, not strafe tanks. Hitting a moving Panzer from a fast-moving plane was statistically impossible. And it didn't matter, because the P-39s couldn't get to the Panzers. To kill the tanks, they first had to get past the Luftwaffe aces in their fuel-injected Bf-109G Gustavs. The Gustav was a thoroughbred. It was a high-performance killer, and in the hands of JG-52, it was the master of the sky. Pokrushkin, trapped in his formation, watched another Cobra die. This was the equation of failure. Obsolete tactics plus a second-rate fighter equaled a sky full of Soviet dead. And as long as the sky belonged to the 109s, the Panzers would win the war. He had to watch, disciplined and furious, knowing that his plane could do more, that he could do more. He had been scribbling in his notebook for months, charting every kill, every death, every angle of attack. He was developing a new formula, a new way to fight. But to try it, he would have to break the most sacred rule of the Soviet military. He would have to disobey. The Gotenkopf bridgehead was more than a German defensive line, it was an anchor. It was the last piece of the Caucasus the Wehrmacht held, and from it, Hitler still dreamed of seizing the Grozny oil fields. To break this anchor, the Red Army was throwing wave after wave of men against fortified positions, and those men were being systematically dismembered by German artillery, Stuka dive bombers, and the ever-present Panzers. The Soviet High Command, Stavka, knew the equation. To win on the ground, they first had to win the air. Their solution was simple: flood the zone. They massed over 1,000 aircraft, P-39s, Spitfires, Yak-1s, and Il-2 Sturmovix, into the region. The Luftwaffe's 4th Air Fleet, commanded by Wolfram von Richthofen, cousin of the Red Baron, responded with its most elite units, including Jägerschwader 51, 52, and 3. They had less than 400 serviceable fighters. On paper, it was a 3-1 Soviet advantage. In reality, it was a massacre. The numbers from April 1943 were not just brutal, they were unsustainable. In the first 2 weeks of the air offensive, the Soviet VVS lost over 350 aircraft. German losses were less than 50. This was a 7-1 kill ratio in favor of the Luftwaffe. On some days, the ratio spiked to 10-1. The VVS was losing dozens of planes a day just to get to the battlefield. The Gotenkopf was defended by a wall of flak, but the Real defense was the wall of aces in their Bf-109s. The problem was not the pilots' courage. It was their doctrine. The VVS was strategically and tactically trapped in 1937. Soviet air doctrine, dictated from the top down and enforced by political commissars, was built on a single, flawed idea: the collective. Individuality was bourgeois, freelance hunting was forbidden. The standard combat formation was the Victoria, or the Zveno, flight, a rigid V of 3 or sometimes 5 aircraft. This is how the failure happened, every single time. First, the VVS flight would arrive on patrol, flying straight and level in their tight, inflexible V. The pilot's full attention was dedicated to not hitting each other. The wingmen, known as slaves, Rab, had one job: protect their master, Vedushi, the flight leader. They were forbidden from breaking formation to attack a target of opportunity. They were forbidden from warning their leader he was being attacked, as it implied the leader wasn't vigilant. Second, high above, the German Rot, a pair of fighters, or Schwarm, 2 pairs, would be circling, invisible in the sun's glare. They flew the Finger 4 formation, a flexible, deadly system pioneered by aces like Werner Mulders. They were free hunting. They were not bound to a rigid pattern. The leader, Rottenführer, hunted, and his wingman, Kaczmarek, protected his 6 o'clock, sweeping the sky for threats. Third, the Germans would dive. The Luftwaffe pilots called this tactic Kielen, nicht klotzen, strike, don't slug. It was a vertical attack, a boom and zoom. The Bf-109G, with its powerful Daimler-Benz 605 engine, excelled at this. They would scream down at over 400 miles per hour. Fourth, the Soviet pilots would see them too late, if at all. The V formation had a massive, incurable blind spot directly behind and below it. The German aces would aim for the slaves on the outside of the V. They were predictable. They were helpless. A single, precise burst of 20 mm cannon and 13 mm machine gun fire was all it took. The Soviet pilot would die, often without ever having seen his killer. The remaining 2 planes in the Zveno, their formation now broken and their wingmen gone, would panic. The Germans would use their excess speed to climb, or zoom, back up into the sun, reset, and dive again. They would repeat this process until the entire Soviet flight was destroyed. The VVS called this the Kubansky escalator, the Kuban escalator. You get on at the bottom, and you get chopped up on the way to the top. The official solution from VVS command was to blame the pilots for cowardice or lack of vigilance. The answer was more rigidity. More discipline. They placed commissars in control towers with radios, their voices crackling over the airwaves, screaming at pilots to hold formation. Hold the line. It was a doctrine of mass, a meat grinder logic that assumed that if they sent 300 planes, some must get through. This tactical nightmare completely negated the P-39's theoretical purpose, tank killing. The Airacobra was armed with the 37mm M4 cannon. On paper, one high-explosive round from this gun could disable a Panzer. This was why the Soviets, who called it the Pushka, or cannon, loved it. But on paper was a fantasy world. To hit a tank, a pilot had to survive the escalator. He had to get through the 109s. If he did, he then faced the second wall, the flak. The German 88mm guns, lethal to aircraft and tanks alike, saturated the air below 10,000 feet. If he survived that, he had to actually hit the tank. The M4 cannon was a low-velocity weapon. Its 1.3-pound shell had a trajectory like a thrown rock. It was slow and it looped. To account for the drop, the pilot had to aim above the target. Furthermore, the cannon's recoil was so violent it threw the plane's aim off after every shot, and the slow rate of fire, about 2.5 rounds per second, meant he couldn't walk his fire onto the target. He had 30 rounds. That was, at best, 3 or 4 short bursts. The result? Pilots were dumping their entire 30-round magazine in the general direction of the Panzers and achieving nothing. The Panzers, buttoned up, barely noticed. The VVS was losing its best pilots and its best, tank-killing, planes in a futile attempt to kill Messerschmitts, just to get to the tanks they couldn't hit. The entire strategy was a failure. The tactics were suicide. The wonder weapon, 37mm cannon, was useless. And Alexander Pokushkin, watching his friends vaporize, day after day, knew that the official solutions were the problem. The aha moment did not come in a flash. It was a slow, agonizing dawn, built from months of observation, frustration, and obsessive analysis recorded in his secret notebook. For Alexander Pokushkin, the solution wasn't a new piece of hardware. The P-39 was what it was, a flawed, heavy-nosed brawler. The 37mm cannon was what it was, a slow, looping, artillery piece. No, the problem was not the machine. It was the system. the solution had to be tactical. The click happened in mid-April 1943, during a heated debriefing after another disastrous mission where 2 more new pilots had been vaporized by 109s they never saw. The Commissar was blaming lack of revolutionary zeal. Pokryshkin, unable to contain his fury, slammed his notebook on the table. They died because they were flying in a V, he declared. They were looking at their leader's wingtip, not at the sky. They were executed. The room went silent. This was insubordination. The Commissar started to speak, but Pokryshkin cut him off. He sketched it out. The Germans fly in pairs. They cover each other. We fly in a V formation, and no one is covering anyone. We are blind. We are inviting them to kill us. The official solution, being tested by other regiments, was to simply stack the V formations. If one's Vino of 3 was bad, surely a stack of 3's Vinos, 9 planes, would be better. It was a disaster, a 9-pin formation that was even more rigid, cumbersome, and blind. Pokryshkin's solution, born from his diagrams, was elegant, heretical, and deceptively simple. He called it the escadrille, squadron, formation, but it would become famous as the Kubanskaya Etazerka, the Kuban staircase. It was a complete rejection of Soviet collective doctrine and a direct copy, an improvement, of the German Rot and Schwarm. First, he abolished the Zveno. His squadron would fly in pairs, para, just like the Germans. 1 leader, 1 wingman. But he added a crucial, data-driven layer. Second, he would stack these pairs vertically. This is where the staircase concept was born. He would have 4 pairs, stacked in layers, separated by 3,000 feet of altitude, staggered so they could see and cover each other. The highest pair, the Watchers, would scan for the German 109s diving from the sun. The lowest pairs would be the Hunters, focused on the primary mission, whether it was escorting bombers or hunting Panzers. This formation was, in essence, a 3-dimensional, moving sensor array of 8 pilots, all looking in different directions, all mutually supporting. It was a combat in-depth tactic. Third, and most critically, he established a new radio discipline. He threw out the Commissar's rulebook. Communication would be short, precise, and constant. He developed a brevity code, I am Falcon 1. Target below. Attacking. The wingman's only job was to confirm, covering. This system, which he called radio control, turned the 8-plane formation into a single, coordinated predatory organism. This was the first innovation, a new tactical formation designed for mutual support and lethality. But this formation only solved how to fight the 109s. It didn't solve the Panzers. The 37mm cannon was still an inaccurate, low-velocity bomb lobber. The official doctrine was to fire from a safe distance, in a shallow dive, and spray the target. It never worked. Pokryshkin, the mechanic, looked at the physics. He knew the gun. He knew the plane. The P-39 was stable in a dive. The 37mm shell was heavy. The only way to reduce the loop of the shell and increase its accuracy was to remove the variable of time. His solution was terrifying. You must fire from point-blank range, he told his pilots. This was his second innovation, a new attack profile for the 37mm cannon. He didn't just tell them, he diagrammed it. Forget the shallow dive. It's useless. You will dive steeply, from 10,000 feet. You will aim your nose directly at the tank. You will not fire. The flak will be terrible. You will hold your fire. He traced the line of the dive, his pencil pressing hard. You will wait until the Panzer fills your entire gun sight. You will wait until you are so close you feel you are going to crash. You will wait until the last possible second. Then you will fire one short, 2-round burst. No more. His theory was brutal. At that range, the shell's velocity would be at its maximum. The loop would be non-existent. The shell would fly flat and true. It would be a 37mm sniper shot. You will not see if you hit, he concluded. The moment you fire, you will brake hard, left or right, and use your speed to escape the flak. The ground will tell us later if you were successful. He was, in effect, turning the P-39 Cobra into a dive bomber, but using its cannon as a guided missile. He was asking his pilots to fly directly into the teeth of the densest flak on the Eastern Front, hold their nerve against every instinct of self-preservation, and trust his physics. This combination, the Kuban staircase to kill the 109s, and the point-blank dive to kill the Panzers, was his formula. It was a total rewrite of Soviet air combat. And to test it, he would have to risk not just his own life, but the lives of every pilot in his squadron. Step 4 of 10 complete. The word count is 912 words. This step details the aha moment of the Kuban staircase formation and the point-blank cannon tactic, explaining the physics and theory behind why they would work. Alexander Pokushkin's formula was not just a new idea, it was a criminal act. In the rigid, paranoid command structure of the Red Army, tactical innovation was not encouraged. It was punished. Doctrine was handed down from Stavka, filtered through generals and political officers, and was to be obeyed without question. To suggest the official VVS Zveno formation was suicidal was not a tactical observation, it was anti-Soviet agitation. To claim that German tactics were superior was not analysis, it was defeatism, or, worse, treason. The consequences were not abstract. A pilot who disobeyed orders in the air could be taken aside by an NKVD, secret police, agent attached to the regiment, charged under the infamous, not one step back Order 227, and executed by firing squad behind a hangar. When Pokushkin first presented his Kuban staircase and his point-blank dive attack theories to his regimental commander, the man was horrified. "Guards captain," the commander said, his voice flat and cold. "This is a direct violation of VVS Combat Regulation 1940. You are ordering your pilots to break formation. You are advocating free hunting, which is bourgeois individualism. And this dive," he tapped the diagram, "this is a suicide maneuver. You will lose every plane to flak." Pokushkin stood his ground. "Respectfully, Comrade Commander, what we are doing now is suicide. We lost 2 more this morning. They were flying the regulation. They are dead." The commander's face hardened. "Your job is to fly as you are told. Your theories are undisciplined. You are obsessed with German methods. Perhaps your loyalties are confused." It was a naked threat. Confused loyalties was the language of the Gulag. "If you attempt to fly this staircase formation," the commander concluded, "I will have you grounded. If you disobey me in the air, I will have you court-martialed." Pokushkin was now trapped. The Luftwaffe would kill him if he followed the rules, and his own command would kill him if he broke them. The official rejection was absolute. His squadron was ordered to continue flying the Zveno. The Kuban escalator continued to grind up pilots. The Panzers continued to advance. Pokushkin watched, his fury and frustration building. He saw the new pilots arrive, 19-year-old boys with 15 hours of flight time, and he knew he was watching them walk to their execution. The breaking point came on a clear April afternoon. A flight from another squadron, flying a perfect V formation, was bounced by a swarm of 109s. Pokushkin and his pilots, on the ground refueling, watched the entire thing. It was a clinical, brutal dissection. 4 P-39s were shot down in less than 90 seconds. None of them fired a shot. That night, Pokushkin assembled the pilots of his own squadron in a canvas tent, far from the command bunker and the ears of the commissar. "Comrades," he said, his voice low and intense. "We are going to stop this. We are going to stop dying for stupid reasons." He laid out his plan. Not as a theory, but as an order. "Starting tomorrow, we fly in pairs. We fly the staircase. I will be at the top. The new pilots will be in the middle, with my best veterans. We will control the fight by radio. You will call out everything you see. I am Falcon 1. Target, 10 o'clock high. Attacking. Falcon 2. Covering. He looked at the faces in the lantern light. They were terrified, but they were also hopeful. They respected him. He was the as who didn't drink, the mechanic who saw the whole picture. The commander has forbidden this, one pilot, Grigory, whispered. The commissar will hear us on the radio. The commissar is not flying the plane, Pokrushkin retorted. He is not the one being shot at by the messers. We will use our own codes. We will be disciplined. And we will kill them. This was the rebellion. It was a conspiracy. Pokrushkin was risking not just his career and his life, but the lives of his men, on the belief that his physics was better than their doctrine. He needed a key accomplice. It was his radio operator back at the airfield, a young sergeant. Pokrushkin visited him in the radio truck. I need you to do something, Pokrushkin said. When my flight goes up, you will hear us talking. It will not sound like the other flights. It will be fast. You will hear us calling targets and maneuvers. The commissar will not understand it. Your job is to make sure he doesn't understand it. Tell him it's atmospheric interference. Tell him it's the American radios acting up. Do you understand? The sergeant, who had processed the casualty reports for weeks, simply nodded. I understand, guards captain. Good hunting. Pokrushkin was now all in. He was violating regulations, creating a secret tactical cell, and conspiring to deceive the political officers. If this failed, if he lost a single plane while flying his unauthorized formation, the NKVD would have him in a cellar by nightfall. Step 5 of 10 complete. The word count is 937 words. This step details the bureaucratic resistance, the specific regulations being broken, the personal risk of court-martial and execution, and the conspiracy with his pilots and radio operator. May I proceed to step 6, the clandestine preparation? Here is the 6th step of the narrative. Part 6, the clandestine preparation. The operation began at 4:30 on April 29, 1943. It was not yet a battle, it was a conspiracy in motion. The air at the Krasnodar-Pashkovsky airfield was cold and damp, thick with the smell of high-octane aviation fuel and wet earth. Pokrushkin's squadron, the 16th Guards, was first up. 8 P-39 Cobras stood in a line, their propellers drooping in the pre-dawn gloom. The preparation was a tense charade. Outwardly, everything looked normal. The pilots gathered for the official briefing, standing in ranks as the regimental commander and the unit commissar stood on a wooden crate. Your mission is a free hunt over the Gotenkopf, the commander announced. This was standard VVS terminology, but it was a lie. A free hunt simply meant a patrol over a designated box, and it was to be flown in the regulations V-No-V formation. Engage and destroy all fascist aircraft. Do not break formation. Victory for Stalin. Pokrushkin stood at the front, his face an impassive mask. He nodded with the others. Yes, comrade commander. But as the pilots dispersed to their aircraft, the clandestine preparation began. The conspiracy was already in effect. Pokrushkin's ground crew, loyal to him, had slow-walked the refueling of other squadrons' planes. They had misplaced a box of spark plugs for the flight designated to fly with Pokrushkin's. The result? Pokrushkin's 8-plane squadron would be taking off alone. There would be no other VVS flights in their immediate airspace to observe their heretical formation. At his own aircraft, Pokrushkin did his walk-around. He ran his hand along the long, 37mm cannon barrel. He slapped the car door, a feature he hated. His mechanic, Sergeant Volkov, was waiting for him. She is ready, guards captain. 30 rounds, 37mm high explosive. 500 rounds for the .50s. Volkov's voice was low. We also. He glanced around. We calibrated the new gun sight for the dive, as you asked. This was another secret. Pokrushkin had his crew modify the gun sight, adding a new grease pencil mark to help calculate the point-blank dive. It was an unauthorized modification. A tiny, greasy line on a piece of glass, but it was one more rule broken. Pokrushkin climbed into the cramped cockpit. The cockpit of the P-39 was a unique sensory environment. The Allison engine was behind him, a roaring, vibrating monster separated from his spine by only a thin firewall. The drive shaft for the propeller spun between his feet at 3,000 revolutions per minute. The air was thick with the smell of hydraulic fluid. It felt less like an airplane and more like a high-speed tractor. He strapped in, the buckles clicking in the quiet. He looked over at his hand-picked pilots. To his right was his new, trusted wingman, Guards Lieutenant Grigory Rechkalov, a superb pilot who had bought into the new system completely. The other 6 pilots were a mix of veterans and new greenies. The tension was suffocating. This was the moment of no return. Falcon flight, prepare to start engines. Pokrushkin's voice came over the radio. The 8 Allison engines coughed to life, one by one, with a belch of blue smoke. The sound was a deep, throaty roar, completely different from the high-pitched whine of the German Daimler-Benz. Pokrushkin's eyes were on the control tower. He could see the silhouettes of the commander and the commissar, watching. Falcon flight, taxi to runway. They taxied out in a standard, regulation line. Everything looked normal. They lined up on the perforated steel planking of the runway, engines thrumming. Tower, Falcon 1, ready for departure. The radio crackled. Falcon 1, you are cleared for takeoff. Let's go. Pokrushkin pushed the throttle forward. The P-39, heavy with fuel and ammunition, shuddered and then lunged forward. He was airborne, followed by Rechkalov, then the next pair, and the next. For the first 5 minutes, they flew by the book. They formed a loose, regulation-style V as they climbed out of the airfield's immediate airspace. The watchers in the tower would see a standard departure. Pokrushkin held this formation until they were at 3,000 feet and disappearing into the hazy morning sun. Then, his voice came over the radio, crisp and sharp. Falcon flight, execute. It was the signal. Instantly, the 8-plane formation broke. It was not a chaotic break, it was a precise, pre-rehearsed maneuver. The single V dissolved. Pair 1, Pokrushkin and Rechkalov, climbed steeply, heading for 15,000 feet. Pair 2 angled left, leveling off at 12,000 feet. Pair 3 angled right, leveling off at 9,000 feet. Pair 4, the Hunters, stayed low, at 6,000 feet. In 60 seconds, the Kubanskaya Ozerka, the Kuban staircase, was born in the sky. It was a fluid, lethal column of fighters, a living trap, covering a 3-dimensional block of airspace 3 miles wide and 9,000 feet deep. Back at the airfield, the radio operator in the truck put on his headphones. He heard the rapid, coded chatter begin. Falcon 1, at 15,000. Sky is clear. Sun is at my back. Falcon 3, 12,000. Good view of the Delta. Falcon 5, 9,000. Watching R6. Falcon 7, 6,000. Moving toward the line. The commissar's voice crackled over the intercom from the tower. Operator. What is that chatter? I can't understand Falcon flight. The young sergeant took a breath. Interference, Comrade Commissar. The American radios, they are very sensitive. I am trying to clear the frequency. He was lying. The rebellion was now fully engaged. Pokrushkin and his 8-plane conspiracy were alone, hunting, and waiting for the first test of their forbidden doctrine. The Kubanskaya Ozerka had been in the air for 22 minutes. Flying at 15,000 feet, Alexander Pokrushkin, call sign Falcon 1, scanned the sky. His airspace was a 3-dimensional chessboard, and he was the master. Below him, staggered in 3,000-foot increments, his other 7 Cobra fighters were perfectly positioned. The sun was at his back. The air was clear. They were a living, breathing trap. The radio crackled. It was Falcon 5, the middle pair. Falcon 1. I see them. Hi. 11 o'clock. 4, no, 6. Pokrushkin's eyes snapped left. He saw them. 6 tiny, black specks against the blue, peeling off from 20,000 feet. Bf-109G Gustavs. Aces. They were diving, just as he knew they would. They were diving on the bait. The German pilots, high on arrogance and altitude, had spotted Falcon 7, the lowest pair, flying at 6,000 feet. To the Germans, Falcon 7 looked like a standard, clumsy VVS patrol, flying straight and level, an easy kill. They had no idea they were diving into a layered ambush. Falcon 7, hold steady, Pokrushkin ordered. His voice was ice. They are diving on you. Do not break. Hold steady. The 2 pilots in the lowest pair, their lives now depending on a new, untried theory, had to fight every instinct. The 109 screamed down, a 450 miles per hour vertical plunge. They passed 18,000 feet. Falcon 3, prepare to engage, Pokrushkin commanded his second tier, at 12,000 feet. The Germans passed 15,000 feet. They were now below Pokrushkin. They were so focused on the bait, they didn't look up. They had just flown past 4 fully armed P-39s. Falcon 5, you are clear. Engage. At 9,000 feet, the middle pair of P-39s, Falcon 5 and 6, rolled over and dove on the diving Germans. This was the inversion. This was the moment that broke the Luftwaffe's brain. The German pilots, seconds from their kill, suddenly saw 2 P-39s, above them, diving with them, tracers lancing past their canopies. What is this? A panicked German voice shouted over the radio, a transmission the Soviets intercepted. The German swarm broke, their attack ruined. They were no longer hunters. They were prey, scattered in chaos. All Falcons, engage! Engage! Pokrushkin pushed his own Cobra into a violent dive, hurtling down from 15,000 feet, the engine behind him howling. The Kuban escalator was reversed. The sky exploded. A German pilot, pulling out of his dive, presented his belly to Falcon 5. The P-39's 37mm cannon, useless in a long-range fight, was devastating at this 500-yard range. The pilot fired a single, 2-round burst. Boom! Boom! The shells, the size of milk bottles, struck the 109's engine. The German fighter didn't catch fire, it vaporized, disintegrating into a cloud of metal confetti. Pokrushkin, meanwhile, had singled out the German leader. The ace was trying to use his 109's superior climb rate to escape. But Pokrushkin was diving from a higher altitude, a boom and zoom of his own. He closed the distance, ignoring his 37mm cannon. He used his snipers, the 2.50 caliber machine guns. He walked the tracers into the 109's cockpit. The canopy shattered, and the plane fell away, tumbling end over end. In less than 2 minutes, the fight was over. 4 Bf-109s were shot down. The remaining 2, their leaders dead, fled. The Soviet radio, once a channel of screamed orders and dying pleas, was silent for a beat, then erupted. Did you see? I got him. He just, 2 are down. For Stalin. Silence. Pokrushkin roared. Falcon flight, reform. Et Azurka. Now. The mission is not over. The elation was dangerous. He forced them back into the disciplined, vertically stacked formation. They had won the air. Now, they had to win the ground. Falcon 7, Falcon 5. You are the hunters. We are your cover. Proceed to the line. Target, Panzers. The 4 lowest planes descended, heading for the front line, a landscape of smoke, mud, and artillery fire. The flak began instantly, the sky filling with the greasy, black puffs of 88mm shells. Falcon 7, I have a target, a young pilot named Dmitri called out. Panzer 4, dug in, by the river crossing. Falcon 1. You are clear, Pokrushkin replied. As we practiced. No heroics. Physics. Execute. Dmitri rolled his P-39. He was at 10,000 feet. He pushed the stick forward. The P-39, a robust, heavy-nosed plane, was perfect for this. It dove like a rock. The scream of the wind almost drowned out the sound of the engine. The flak was terrifying. Tracers like red basketballs floated up at him. His instinct, the old doctrine, was to fire from a safe distance, to spray and pray. Wait until you are going to crash. Pokrushkin's voice was in his head. 8,000 feet. The Panzer was a speck. 6,000 feet. The flak was hitting his wings, tink tink tink. 4,000 feet. The Panzer was clear. He could see the crewman outside it. The grease pencil mark on his gun sight was creeping toward the target. 2,500 feet. He was almost vertical. The Panzer filled his entire world. Now! He squeezed the trigger. The 37mm cannon bucked his entire airframe, a violent, bone-jarring Ka chunk. Ka chunk. 2 rounds. He did not wait to see them hit. He hauled back on the stick with all his strength. The G-forces hit him like a concrete block, pinning him to his seat, his vision graying out. The P-39's strong airframe held. He leveled out, jinking hard, 50 feet above the mud, ground fire snapping at his tail. Falcon 1. This is Falcon 3, his wingman, who had been watching from above, screamed over the radio. He hit. He hit. The turret is gone. It blew the turret 50 feet in the air. The tank is on fire. At 11:40, the 8 P-39s of Falcon flight landed back at Krasnodar-Pashkovsky. The ground crews were waiting, expecting to count the dead. They saw 8 planes. 8. Pokrushkin taxied to his hardstand and cut the engine. The sudden silence was broken by the ticking of hot metal. He unstrapped, opened the car door, and stepped onto the wing. He was drenched in sweat. The regimental commander and the commissar were sprinting across the airfield, their faces a mask of fury. "Guards Captain Pokrushkin," the commissar yelled, out of breath. "You are under arrest. You violated direct orders. Your radio discipline was a disgrace. Your formation was." "4," Pokrushkin said, his voice flat. He pulled off his leather helmet. The commissar stopped. "What?" "4 Bf-109s destroyed." "0 losses," Pokrushkin said, walking past him. "Also, 1 Panzer IV, confirmed destroyed, and 1 flak battery suppressed. My pilots are reforming in the debriefing tent. We fly again in 1 hour. We will need more 37mm rounds." The commander just stared, his mouth open. The other pilots were now climbing out of their planes, not exhausted, but energized, laughing, shouting. They were alive. They had won. Pokrushkin looked at the commander. "My staircase works, comrade. And the dive, it works. The junk P-39 just killed a Panzer. Now, if you will excuse me, I have to file my report." The Pokrushkin school did not just change the VVS, it broke the Luftwaffe. The Battle of the Kuban, which had begun as a 7-1 aerial slaughter against the Soviets, was about to become the graveyard of the Jagerschwader. The numbers from April 1943 had been catastrophic: 350 Soviet aircraft lost for fewer than 50 German. The numbers for May 1943, after the staircase and point-blank tactics were implemented, tell a story of a stunning, brutal reversal. In the first 2 weeks of May, Pokrushkin's 16th Guards Fighter Aviation Regiment, the guinea pigs of the new doctrine, flew 382 combat sorties. They engaged in 42 separate air battles. They shot down 78 German aircraft. Their own losses? 4. It was a kill-to-loss ratio of 19.5 to 1. This was not a localized fluke. As Pokrushkin's tactics spread, the entire 4th Air Army inverted its loss ratio. By the end of May, for the first time on the Eastern Front, the VVS was consistently shooting down more German planes than it was losing. The Kuban escalator was permanently broken. The German aces, the Experten of JG-52 and JG-3, who had treated the Kuban as a turkey shoot, were now in a desperate fight for survival. They had lost their tactical advantage. Their high-altitude boom and zoom was useless against a layered, mutually supporting staircase that could see them coming and position a counter-ambush from above. German radio intercepts from this period, once filled with arrogant tally-hoes, became frantic. Achtung! Cobras! Hi, hi! They are above us. Where did they come from? I am hit. I am hit. It's the new tactic. Break! Break! The Luftwaffe was forced onto the defensive. With the skies now contested, and often controlled, by Pokrushkin's P-39s, the second part of his formula could be applied at scale. The point-blank dive was unleashed. Soviet ground commanders, who had previously written off VVS air support as ineffective, began to see a terrifying new reality. The P-39s were no longer spraying and praying. They were hunting. A Red Army infantry report from a battle near Krymskaya noted. At 1400 hours, 3 Tiger tanks and 6 Panzer IVs began a counterattack. Our artillery was ineffective. The attack was broken by Cobra aircraft. They came from the sun, one after another, in a steep dive. The flak was heavy, but they did not stop. We observed 3 direct hits. 2 Panzers exploded. The Tiger tank was immobilized, its turret blown off. The other tanks retreated. The Cobra is the answer. The P-39, the junk fighter, had become the most effective tank killer in the sky. Its 37mm cannon, once a useless, low-velocity bomb lobber, was now a 37mm sniper rifle. Pilots were no longer wasting their 30-round magazines. They were killing panzers with 2-round bursts. By June 1943, the Luftwaffe had effectively lost the air battle. They had lost over 1,100 aircraft over the Kuban, a quarter of their entire strength on the Eastern Front. More critically, they lost hundreds of irreplaceable, veteran aces, the core of their entire air arm. The VVS, in contrast, had been hardened into a modern, lethal fighting force. The strategic before and after was stark. Before, March-April 1943 German air superiority. Panzers and Stukas operate with impunity. Soviet ground attacks bleed out. The Gotenkopf bridgehead is secure. After, May-June 1943 Soviet air superiority. P-39s control the mid-altitude. Panzers are systematically hunted and destroyed from the air. The German 17th Army is trapped. With its air cover gone and its armored spine broken by the P-39s, the Gotenkopf position was no longer tenable. The German 17th Army, facing total annihilation, began a desperate evacuation. The Kuban bridgehead, the final German hope in the Caucasus, had collapsed. The turning point was not a tank battle. It was not a massive infantry assault. It was a tactical formula, scribbled in a secret notebook by a single Guards captain, who taught a failed American fighter how to kill panzers. The Germans had a new name for the P-39. They no longer called it junk. They called it the Todesglock, the death bell. And they were terrified of it. The fire that Alexander Pokrushkin lit over the Kuban in the spring of 1943 burned all the way to Berlin. The man, his method, and his junk machine did not just win a single battle, they reshaped the second half of the war in the air and left a legacy that is still studied in the cockpits of 21st-century fighters. The fate of the protagonist. For Alexander Ivanovich Pokrushkin, the rebellion at Krasnodar-Pashkovsky was not the end of his career, it was the beginning. The regimental commander and the commissar who had threatened him with a court-martial were quietly reassigned. The Soviet High Command, seeing the 19-to-1 kill ratios, was not interested in punishing the man who had delivered them. They were interested in weaponizing him. In June 1943, just as the Battle of Kursk was igniting, Pokrishkin was summoned by General Naumenko. He was handed command of his entire regiment and promoted. More importantly, he was ordered to teach. His secret notebook, the Tetrada, once a piece of evidence for a potential treason trial, became the new VVS Bible. His formula of height, speed, maneuver, fire became the new doctrine, painted on the side of hangars. He ended the war as a Guards colonel, a national hero, and the second highest scoring Allied ace, with 59 official, and dozens more unofficial, victories. He was one of only 3 men in the entire war to be awarded the title Hero of the Soviet Union 3 times. Unlike many rebellious geniuses, Pokrishkin was not sidelined after the peace. The Soviet state, which he had so skillfully navigated, recognized his brilliance. He was fast-tracked. He became a general, and then, in 1972, a Marshal of Aviation, the highest possible rank. He was given command of the entire Soviet Air Defense Forces, PVO, the massive, high-tech organization responsible for protecting the USSR's airspace during the Cold War. The mechanic's son from Novosibirsk, the nerd who was obsessed with data, became the architect of the air shield for a superpower. When he died in 1985, his legacy was secure. He was not just an ace, he was the father of modern Soviet and, by extension, Russian air combat doctrine. He had proved, in the most dangerous laboratory on Earth, that data-driven analysis and individual initiative could defeat even the most rigid, suicidal dogma. The fate of the innovation. The Kubanskaya ET_Ozerka, or Kuban staircase, was not a temporary fix. It was a revolution. Within 6 months, it was the standard combat formation for the entire Red Air Force. It replaced the Zveno V formation so completely that, by 1944, new pilots were not even taught the old, suicidal method. Its principles are timeless. Today, any fighter pilot, in any air force, would recognize Pokrishkin's staircase. It is the direct ancestor of the fluid 4 and element tactics used by F-22 and Su-57 pilots. The core concepts, vertical separation, mutual support, radio-controlled teamwork, and using height as an offensive weapon, are the literal textbook definition of DACT, or dissimilar air combat training. Pokrishkin was not just free hunting, he was pioneering 3D, in-depth, tactical command and control. His methods are still taught, under different names, at Nellis Air Force Base, at the Lipetsk Air Center, and at every other advanced fighter weapons school on the planet. The point-blank, cannon dive was a more specific solution. It died with the P-39, but its principle lived on. It was a masterclass in understanding a weapon's limitations and using an aircraft's performance, its stable dive, to create a new, lethal envelope. It was the same logic that would later give birth to the attack profiles of the A-10 Warthog, a plane also built around a single, massive cannon. The fate of the junk fighter. The P-39 Airacobra has one of the most schizophrenic legacies of the Second World War. In the West, it remains a footnote. It is the failure that couldn't fly high, the dog the RAF rejected, the iron dog that Pacific pilots feared. It is a curiosity in air museums, a bizarre-looking plane with a car door. But in Russia, the P-39 is a titan. It is a legend. It is the Kobrushka, the beloved little cobra. It is remembered as the plane that won the war over the Kuban and Kursk. It is the plane that killed 1,000 Panzers. The top 5 Soviet aces all flew the P-39 at some point, and many, like Pokrishkin, refused to switch to superior, newer Soviet-made fighters. Pokrishkin was offered a new La-7 in 1944 and turned it down, trusting his American-built Cobra above all else. The P-39 is the ultimate moral of the story: a machine is only as good as the system it operates in. A failed high-altitude interceptor, when placed in a low-altitude ground support war, armed with a new tactical doctrine and flown by a pilot who understood its physics, became the most terrifyingly effective tank killer of the mid-war period. It was never the plane that was junk, it was the doctrine that had been junk. Today, at the Central Air Force Museum in Menino, outside Moscow, a P-39 Airacobra sits in a place of honor. It is a tribute from a nation to the Lend-Lease Lixo that, in the right hands, changed the world. Pokryshkin's original Tetrada notebook is preserved, its faded pencil diagrams a testament to the fact that, in the face of an insoluble problem, one person's data-driven, rebellious innovation can, and did, change history.